Hey, before we start, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you lying in bed with the lights off, sitting alone in your car? Maybe scrolling through your phone at 3 a.m. because you couldn't sleep? Whatever time it is where you are, type it in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it hit when this story found you. Because if there's one thing I've learned, some stories don't care what time it is. They find you when you're alone. Now take a breath and listen carefully. I'd been hiking solo through the Appalachian Trail for 4 days. It wasn't my first time on these paths. I've done sections before, but I usually went in spring. This time, late October, the air felt heavier, quieter. The trees had thinned, their bare limbs reaching up like bones against the gray sky. Around noon, a storm rolled in faster than I expected, thunder low and constant like it had been waiting. I checked my map and saw an old fire tower marked about a mile off trail. Figured it was my best bet to ride out the rain. By the time I got there, the wind had picked up. The fire tower looked long abandoned, paint peeling, steps half rotted, the cabin at the top boarded up from the outside. I wasn't climbing that. Instead, I pitched my tent just downhill from it, tucked against the tree line, where the forest met a patch of tall grass. The rain started soon after. Inside the tent, it was quiet except for the rhythmic patter of water. I boiled some rice, jotted in my trail journal, and tried to sleep. The last thing I saw before zipping up the tent was the tower silhouette up. The hill, dark, silent, almost lost in the fog. Around midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it. Boots, slow, heavy, crunching wet leaves. The steps circled once, then paused. Then again, circling the tent. I froze. My first thought was a bear, but these weren't animal sounds. It was someone walking, deliberate, slow, like they were thinking or watching. I reached for my flashlight, held my breath. The steps were still circling. Then, they stopped right beside my head. I counted silently. 5 seconds. 10. 20. I unzipped the tent fast, aimed the flashlight. Nothing, just fog, rain, the silhouette of the fire tower through the trees. I stepped out, scanned the ground. Mud, wet leaves. My own prints, messy and scattered from setting up camp earlier. But just past them, one set of boot prints. Not mine. Fresh, deep, leading away, into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the tent with the flashlight in my lap, waiting for the sun to come up. I told myself maybe it was a hunter passing through, but I knew the sound. Whoever it was, they had been circling me, watching. By morning, the rain had let up, but everything was soaked. I packed up quickly, not even eating. I just wanted to get back on the trail and put miles between me and that place. But before I left, I followed the boot prints. I shouldn't have, I know that now. But something in me needed to know. They led through the woods, uphill, circling back toward the fire tower. At first I thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe they were mine after all. But then they veered, off around the far side of the tower into overgrowth. There was an old service shed half collapsed. Rusted tools scattered inside, broken ladder, cracked helmet. Behind it, wedged between some rocks and vines, was what looked like a hatch. It was barely visible. Metal rusted over, with a handle you'd miss unless you were looking for it. I pulled. It screeched, resisted, then gave. Below was a narrow, concrete stairwell. Smelled like rot and old wet wood. I told myself to turn back, but I didn't. The stairs led down maybe 20 feet. At the bottom, a room. Concrete walls, empty except for an old metal bed frame, some rotted blankets, and a wooden chair facing the corner. There were scratch marks along the wall, long, jagged, clustered around the corner, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I felt dizzy. The air was thick. The silence, it wasn't peaceful. It pressed against your ears, like sound couldn't exist down there. There was something else too, a journal, half molded, stuck beneath a board. I peeled it open carefully. Only a few pages were legible. Still watching me. Every night I hear them walk around the tower. Thought I was safe up here. But they know. They know I saw. Don't sleep anymore. Every time I do, I wake up to them knocking. They never speak, just walk, just circle. Left prints again. Not mine. Just like last year. No name. No dates. Just those fragments. I climbed out fast. I didn't look. Back at the hatch. I didn't even check my map. I just picked a direction and walked for hours. Until I hit the road and flagged down a trucker near Saltville. That was 3 years ago. I haven't gone back. But I still think about that night. Sometimes when I camp alone, I find myself waking up around midnight, holding my breath, listening, and once, just once, I stepped outside and found a single set of boot prints. Not mine. Just far enough away to make me question it. Just close enough to know I didn't imagine it. I was never much of a hunter, but my cousin Luke talked me into a winter trip up in the Jefferson National Forest. He'd been going every year with his dad before he passed, and this year he didn't want to go alone. We drove up from Roanoke in his beat-up Tacoma, winding our way through switchbacks and icy gravel roads until we hit the old fire trail near Dismal Creek. There was a cabin just off the ridge, one of those hunter-built things from the 70s. No plumbing, no electricity. Just cold wood and rusted nails. Luke's dad had helped build it, and it still had their name carved into one of the beams inside. Trenner 83. It was already below freezing when we arrived, fog crawling low through the trees. Everything smelled like wet moss, pine needles, and smoke. We got a fire going fast and set our gear down inside. 2 sleeping bags, rifles, a half loaf of cornbread, and a plastic thermos of coffee that had leaked all over my pack. We planned to hike out early the next morning and track through the southern ridge. The sun came up pale and flat through the fog. No wind, no birds. Even our footsteps felt muffled. About an hour into the hike, we hit a split in the trail near a patch of dead pines. Luke wanted to follow some fresh deer tracks heading west. I said I'd take the East Fork and loop back around the ridge to meet him. We did that sort of thing before, always had radios or whistles, but this time, nothing. The fog thickened fast, like it had weight. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The trees lost their shape, just became dark smudges in gray. I tried staying calm, kept my bearings by checking moss growth and slope direction like Luke taught me. But after a while, everything started to look the same. Tree after tree, branch after branch. Then I heard it. "Jason," it was Luke's voice. Far off to my left, I turned, but there was nothing. "Jason, come this way." Now from behind me. I spun again. Same voice, same tone, calm, familiar, but it never got closer. It kept calling, from every direction. Sometimes far, sometimes just a few yards off. Always using my name, always in Luke's voice. I started shouting back, louder each time. But there was no reply, no crunch of boots in the snow. Just fog. My hands were going numb. I tried to retrace my steps, but even my boot prints had softened in the melting frost. Everything was damp and quiet, like the woods had swallowed all the sound. Then, finally, I found an old logging road. Broken brush, deep ruts, rusted nails, and some split planks. I followed it downhill, heart pounding, rifle clutched like it was going to protect me from something I couldn't see. After maybe 20 minutes, I saw a figure through the mist, standing by a tree stump. It was Luke, pale-faced, shaking, holding his rifle like he was ready to use it. When I reached him, he looked at me like I was something that crawled out of the ground. "I thought you were behind me," he said. "I've been hearing you call my name for hours." We didn't say much walking back, just kept our heads down, boots crunching through patches of wet ice and needles. I kept glancing sideways, trying to figure out if Luke was messing with me, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. Back at the cabin, we sat by the stove in silence. I didn't know what to say. Neither did he. I kept going over it in my head, the voice, the fog, the way it seemed to move around me. But more than that, I couldn't get past the look on Luke's face when I found him. That wasn't confusion. That was fear. Later that night, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I thought maybe Luke had gone outside to smoke, but his sleeping bag was zipped and still. I held my breath. The steps stopped at the door. No knock, no creak, just the sound of breath, like someone was standing just on the other side, exhaling slow against the wood. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, we didn't talk about it. Just packed up and left. But right before we pulled away, Luke walked over to the porch. He was staring at something. I got out to look. There were boot prints in the frost. 2 sets. One his, one mine, and a third, lighter, narrower, like someone had walked barefoot through the melting ice. We didn't speak a word on the drive back. It's been 5 years. Luke doesn't hunt anymore. He moved to Charlotte, barely talks to anyone from back home. Sometimes we text, usually around winter, always short. Just a, hope you're good, or still thinking about the trip. I still go into the mountains, sometimes. But I stay on the main trail. I don't separate from the group. And when fog rolls in, I stop. Because once, just once, I swear I heard it again. My own voice, whispering through the trees, calling my name. The summer after I graduated, I took a temp job with the State Forestry Department. Mostly grunt work, trail maintenance, erosion checks, minor surveying. It didn't pay much, but it came with solitude, and that's what I needed back then. My mom had passed away that spring, and I wasn't ready to go back to school or sit in some apartment pretending to be fine. They assigned me a section up near Laurel Fork, about 2 hours past Damascus. Technically still Virginia, but just barely. The roads got worse the farther in I went. Narrow switchbacks, overgrown shoulders, no cell service after the first ridge. By the time I reached my drop point, I was alone in a stretch of mountains where you could hike all day without seeing a soul. I camped in the same spot every night, flat patch just off a long-forgotten trail, with a rotting signpost that read, "Do not maintain." It was probably meant for forest crews, not hikers, but it felt like a warning either way. My first week went fine. Early mornings, long hikes, marking tree damage, flagging areas for later cleanup. I'd returned dusty, sore, and just glad to be tired. The woods were quiet, a kind of quiet that settles into your chest. No planes overhead, no highway hum. Just cicadas, birds, and the occasional creak of the trees shifting in the wind. Then about 10 days in, I noticed a small pile of rocks along the trail I'd cleared the day before. It was nothing dramatic, maybe 6 or 7 stones stacked, deliberately like a tiny tower. I figured it was just some hiker's cairn, even though no one was supposed to be using this trail. I knocked it down with my boot. The next morning, I found 2 new stacks, one along the ridge and another right by the small wooden bridge I'd helped reinforce the week before. I didn't knock them down this time, just stared at them for a while. They weren't sloppy. Each rock was flat, centered, carefully balanced. Something about them felt precise, purposeful. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind came hard through the valley, rattling my tent and bending the trees in long groaning arcs. I didn't sleep much. By week 3, the stacks were showing up every day. Always in places I had worked the day before, always in clear sight, like they were meant to be seen. Then, one morning, I unzipped my tent and found one right outside, not more than a foot from the flap. 7 stones stacked vertically. Wedged between the middle rocks was a torn piece of paper, a corner ripped from the top of my survey map. It was my handwriting, my marks. I knew it because the section it showed was where I had written a note, to myself. Stream erosion at mile 6 flagged, except that section was back at camp. I'd folded the map up and tucked it into my field journal the night before. I checked the journal. The map was still inside, intact. But now there were 2 copies. I didn't hike that day. I just sat at camp and tried to think it through. Maybe someone else from the department was out here too. Some quiet guy playing a weird joke, but the only vehicle I'd seen was the one that dropped me off, and the radio hadn't crackled in days. That evening, I walked the perimeter around camp, checked for tracks, trash, anything. Found nothing. Except, farther out, behind a ring of poplars, I saw something strange. About 10 rock stacks, some tall, some tiny, all arranged in a loose spiral. It looked like someone had been building them over time, adjusting, rebuilding. One had moss packed between the stones. Another had a torn bit of orange flagging tape like the ones I used to mark trails. None of it made sense. I considered tearing them down. I didn't. Something about them felt watched. That night I woke to the sound of small stones clinking, like someone gently placing rocks together one by one. It wasn't loud, just there, steady. I held my breath and listened. Then it stopped. I waited until morning, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside. There was a new stack. This time, there was no map, no tape, just a single glove, mine, wedged beneath the top, stone. It was damp and muddy, even though I hadn't used it in days. I packed my gear. No breakfast, no coffee. Just shoved everything into my bag and hiked down the ridge toward the old service road. It took hours and I lost the trail twice, but I didn't stop until I hit gravel. I never told the forestry office. I signed my end-of-season paperwork and said thank you. They offered me a spot the following summer. I declined. I kept that torn map, the one from the rock pile. It's still folded in the back of a drawer in my apartment. I don't look at it much, but sometimes when I can't sleep, I'll open it just to be sure. And every time it's still there. That note in my own handwriting, stream erosion at mile 6, flagged, even though I burned the original journal years ago, even though I've moved 3 times since then. The map always finds its way back. Last October, I took a solo backpacking trip through the Cranberry Wilderness in West Virginia. I'd planned a 4-day loop starting near Richwood, circling back along an old trail that ran through some hollow valleys and up along the ridges. The trip wasn't about adventure. I'd just come off a rough breakup and needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere no one could reach me. I left my phone in airplane mode the whole time. No service out there anyway. The first 2 days were uneventful. Chilly mornings, quiet trails, a few faded blazes on trees, but otherwise not much to guide you except instinct. I passed an old stone chimney once, half swallowed by undergrowth. No house left, just the stack and some broken bricks sunk into the mud. That was the only man-made thing I saw for miles. By the 3rd day, I misjudged how long the descent into a valley would take. The sun dropped fast behind the ridgeline. I didn't want to be navigating wet switchbacks in the dark, so I stopped and made camp in the hollow below. It was a tight little spot, sheltered by hemlocks, with soft moss underfoot and a stream trickling a few yards away. The fog started rolling in around dusk, thick and low, settling between the trees like smoke. Everything smelled damp, wet leaves, cold rock, a faint hint of rot. The only sounds were the occasional drip from a branch and the distant croak of a frog. I boiled some instant rice, jotted a few lines in my trail journal, and crawled into my sleeping bag. That's when I noticed it. Movement, just shapes at first, barely perceptible through the mist. Upright, motionless, high on the ridge above me, maybe a dozen of them. I figured they were trees. I even chuckled to myself, thinking how my eyes were playing tricks. But something made me grab my flashlight. I clicked it on and aimed it toward the ridge. The beam cut through the fog. For a second, just a second, the light caught faces, human faces, pale, silent, staring down the valley toward me. Then, just as fast, they turned in unison and disappeared into the dark. I sat frozen in my bag for a long time, listening, waiting. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no leaves rustling. Just that same eerie stillness. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be a trick of the fog. Maybe I'd seen tree bark, or the shimmer of dew. Maybe I was just overtired. But I didn't sleep. By sunrise, the fog had thinned, but the cold hung heavy in the air. I packed up quickly, barely touching my food. Every few minutes, I looked up at the ridge. It was empty now, just bare trunks and fallen branches. No sign of anything or anyone. I climbed back onto the trail and hiked uphill through the hollow, following the ridgeline in reverse. The ground was soft from last night's rain, mud clinging to my boots. At the top, I found a narrow clearing, an old trail spur maybe, choked with ferns and blackberry vines. And something else. Footprints human, barefoot, several of them, some large, some small. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Still crisp around the edges, pressed deep in the soft dirt. They weren't going anywhere, just circling. I followed the tracks a few feet. The ground dipped into a shallow basin shielded by thick brush. In the center sat a circle of stones, charred in the middle, blackened by fire, but long dead. Beside it was a rotting wooden crate, half open, filled with torn fabric and rusted utensils. And near it, something that stopped me cold. A faded canvas backpack, same make and brand as mine. Older model but nearly identical. Inside, a weathered notebook wrapped in a plastic bag, pages swollen from years of moisture. The writing was faint, but legible. They don't follow. They wait. Stay on the ridge. Don't go below. If you hear them breathe, you're too close. That last line was underlined 3 times. I didn't touch anything else. I backed out of that clearing and hiked the rest of the day without stopping. Didn't eat, didn't rest, just moved. I made it back to the trailhead by dusk and drove through the night without sleeping. I've never gone back. That journal, those words, still haunt me. Sometimes late at night when I'm parked alone, somewhere quiet, I'll catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Always uphill, always just watching. I haven't told anyone until now because here's what I keep thinking. They didn't follow me out, but I don't think they stayed behind either. It was Ray's idea. He always had a thing for forgotten places, derelict barns, collapsed rail trestles, fire roads that didn't appear on maps anymore. He called it honest quiet. That August, we took 3 days off and drove out to the southwest corner of Virginia, near the Kentucky border. Ray had found coordinates for an old coal mining settlement near a town called Bartley Hollow, which hadn't had a post office in decades. The mines had dried out sometime in the 1940s, he said. No one had lived out there since. We parked off a rutted trail and hiked in with our gear. The air was thick and still. The deeper we went into the woods, the more the trees leaned in over the trail, their branches weaving together like they didn't want light getting through. Eventually, we found the remnants, rusted carts, twisted rails half swallowed by earth, and the dark maw of the mine entrance tucked behind a curtain of vines. Someone had tried to board it up once. Most of the wood was rotted, easy to push aside. We didn't go in, not really. Just poked our heads in, saw how far the black went. Even with the sun overhead, the air inside was cold, like standing next to a dead refrigerator. We set up camp, a little ways downslope from the shaft. Dry, flat ground, a stream nearby. Quiet aside from the usual forest sounds, cicadas, frogs, wind dragging through the underbrush. That night the silence felt thicker, more complete. We both noticed it but didn't say anything. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't have space for birdsong. No owls, no branches creaking, just stillness. Sometime before dawn, I woke up, not to a noise but a feeling. One of those bone-deep alerts that something isn't right. I sat up and listened. Then I heard it, metal on stone, a slow, dragging scrape. It echoed faintly through the trees, like it was coming from inside the tunnel, like someone dragging something, sharp down a wall. Ray heard it too. I saw him sit up, flashlight already in his hand. We looked at each other for a moment, then unzipped the tent and stepped into the dark. No wind, just that rhythmic sound, like steel biting into rock. Then silence. We walked to the tunnel mouth. Ray went a few steps inside and aimed his light at the walls. That's when we saw them. Fresh pickaxe marks, carved deep, clean lines, running horizontal along the left side of the tunnel wall. The rock around them was warm. I touched one. It almost burned. Ray didn't say anything. He just backed out, slowly. We both stood there for a while, staring into that black mouth, the way it just swallowed the light. We didn't go back to sleep. We stayed one more night, though we both knew we shouldn't have. It was stubbornness more than anything else. Neither of us wanted to be the one to admit we were spooked by old rocks and creaking metal. The next day, we hiked further up the ridge, thinking maybe distance would help clear our heads. Found what was left of an old bunkhouse. Nothing but a stone foundation and a few rusted bed frames tangled in weeds. No real shelter, just bones of a place that used to matter. That evening, we sat around the fire in silence. I could tell Ray was still thinking about the pick marks. So was I. Just after midnight, we heard the sound again. Louder this time. Rhythmic. Measured. Not dragging now. Chipping. 1. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. Sharp, metallic strikes. Coming from the tunnel. Ray stood up fast. Grabbed his flashlight and rifle. I followed. Slower. We reached the tunnel and stood outside the entrance. The sound stopped the second Ray's light hit the stone. Like it had never happened. He stepped. Inside. I stayed at the edge. "Jake," he said after a moment. "You need to see this." I stepped in. The pick marks from the night before were still there. But now, next to them, were more. Dozens more. And carved into the center wall, just above, eye level, were 2 words. "Still here." The lettering was uneven but fresh. No moss, no dust. We left before the sun came up. That was 5 years ago. Ray doesn't talk about it. I asked him once if he ever figured it out. Some echo trick. Maybe vibrations from a mine collapse underground. He just shook his head and changed the subject. I still dream about that tunnel sometimes. Not the sound, but the cold. The smell of rust and wet stone. And that wall. I never told Ray, but before we left, I took a picture. I don't know why. Maybe to prove it happened. Maybe to make sure it stayed real. But here's the part that keeps me up. The photo's still on my phone, only the wall is bare. No marks, no message, just stone. I was driving through the lower stretch of the Blue Ridge when my truck gave out. Somewhere between Harlan Ridge and a nothing town called Elmore Creek. The GPS had cut out hours earlier, and I hadn't passed another car since dusk. No reception. No mile markers. Just the kind of road that seems like it forgot it was paved, rutted, half-cracked, with moss creeping up the shoulders. I'd been heading to visit my uncle's old place in Wayne's Gap, a cabin he hadn't used in years. I figured I'd camp out there for the weekend, clear my head. But around 9 p.m., right as the mist started rolling in low from the hills, my truck shuddered, coughed, and died. No warning. Just a quiet click when I turned the key again. I waited, hoping maybe someone would come by, but the road stayed empty. Eventually, I grabbed my flashlight and started walking, following the curve of the road, hoping it'd lead toward a house, a gas station, anything. A half hour in, I saw it. A soft orange glow flickering through the trees on the right. Lantern light. It moved slightly, swaying like someone was walking with it. I called out, waved my arms. No answer, but the light lingered, just visible between the trunks. I left the road and started moving through the woods toward it, crunching leaves, branches slapping against my jacket. The forest was soaked from earlier rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and smoke. The light disappeared for a second, then reappeared farther ahead. I pushed on. After maybe 15 minutes of weaving through undergrowth and fog, I stumbled into a small clearing. The trees pulled back, revealing what was left of an old shack, burned down long ago, just a collapsed frame of charred wood and stone. No light, just ash, mud, and the skeletal remains of a chimney leaning awkwardly to one side. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The place was clearly abandoned, but the ground was wrong. There were footprints, not mine, faint impressions in the soft dirt around the edges of the shack. Deep, scattered, circling like someone had paced there recently. I walked closer. The air grew colder near the ruins, like the heat had been sucked from the ground. The burnt board still gave off a faint metallic scent, wet rust and old fire. That's when I saw it again. The light. Not in the clearing this time, but back in the trees and where I'd just come from. Same distance, same slow sway. It hadn't followed me. I had somehow passed through it. I should have turned back. That's what I tell myself now. But something about the light, about the way it waited, pulled me in again. I stepped back into the woods, heart thudding. Each time I moved toward the glow, it shifted farther. Always just far enough that I had to keep going. My flashlight began to flicker, not out of batteries, just a faint pulsing like it couldn't decide how bright to be. Eventually, I reached another small trail, narrow and nearly swallowed by moss and undergrowth. The kind of path you don't find unless you're looking too closely. There, the lantern light hovered beside an old rusted mailbox. No house. Just the box, half buried in vines. The name was barely legible, worn down to almost nothing. But scratched underneath the rust was a date. 1952. I opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Damp, curled at the corners. In shaking, pencil was a short note. If you see the light, don't follow it. Stay on the road, stay quiet. It doesn't know you're lost if you don't let it. The wind shifted, a sudden gust. Trees groaned, and behind me, close, I heard it. A soft metallic creak, like the handle of a lantern swinging slowly on its hook. I turned. Nothing. No light. No person. Just trees. And then I saw it. Carved into the nearest trunk. A single line, fresh and damp. Turn around. I ran. I don't know how long. Long. Enough that my legs gave out. Long enough that I ended up face down in gravel. When I looked up, I was back on the road. My truck was still there. The driver's door was wide open. I know I locked it. Inside, everything was untouched, except my flashlight. It was sitting upright on the passenger seat, still flickering, like it had never left my hand. I left the truck and walked 3 miles down that road before I found a ranger station just after sunrise. Never told them the full story. Just said I got turned around, that my battery died. They nodded, didn't ask much, just offered me a ride and a thermos of burnt coffee. That was 4 years ago. I haven't gone back since. But every now and then when I'm driving late through the mountains and the fog creeps in, I catch a flicker out of the corner of my eye. A slow, swaying orange glow, and I keep my hands tight on the wheel, and I never, ever look twice. Back in 2019, my friend Tyler inherited a hunting cabin from his grandfather. A small, weather-beaten place tucked deep into the Appalachian woods near a shuttered coal town called Manley Ridge. His family hadn't used the cabin in years, and he'd asked me to help fix it up for a long weekend trip in October. We drove out on a Friday morning, taking an old gravel service road that twisted past hollow creeks and rusting mailboxes with no homes attached. The fog hugged the treetops, like it didn't want to lift. You don't see places like this on tourist maps. You feel them in the air. Old, damp, heavy with things that have been forgotten too long. The cabin sat in a low basin near a hollowed stream bed. A porch sagged out front, and the tin roof had rusted through in spots. Inside it smelled like wet firewood, mouse droppings, and the faint chemical sweetness of decaying insulation. We spent most of the first day pulling out nests and moldy bedding, airing out the place. The floors creaked like bones under tension, and every hinge screamed when moved. It wasn't haunted exactly, just tired. That night, After a long day of hauling junk and patching leaks, we built a fire in the wood stove and played cards until we ran out of daylight. There was no electricity, just lantern light and the dull hum of the wind slipping through the trees. Tyler fell asleep early on the couch. I stayed up listening to the soft hiss of the stove and the occasional pop of settling wood. Around midnight I heard it, a soft tapping. Not random, not branches or wind. Rhythmic, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. I turned down the lantern wick and moved to the window beside the stove. It faced the edge of the tree line where the dark grew thick fast. Nothing. No movement. No sound now. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, wet with the smell of moss and smoke. I swept the flashlight across the clearing. No deer, no wind, not even crickets. Next morning I mentioned it to Tyler over coffee. He paused, then said, "I thought I dreamed that." He'd heard it too. We chalked it up to old pipes, or maybe a raccoon. You tell yourself those things when you don't want to dig deeper. But the next night the tapping came back. Different window, same sound. And once again, no tracks in the dirt the next morning. By the third night we were both on edge. We double-checked the windows, sealed the shutters, even set out trail mix by the back wall to see if any animal would take the bait. Nothing touched it. We went to bed earlier, the stove throwing just enough heat to fight the creeping cold. I laid awake longer this time, not even pretending to sleep. The tapping started again around 1 a.m., closer. This time it came from the small window above the kitchen sink, the one with the cracked frame Tyler had planned to replace next trip. We both heard it, sat up without speaking. Tap, tap, tap. I moved into the kitchen with the flashlight. The sound stopped. I waited, watching the glass. Just faint reflection, nothing else. I pressed my hand to the pane. It was colder than it should have been, like ice was forming around the corners. I don't know what made me lean in, but I did. And I noticed something that hadn't been there before. At the lower left corner of the window, a small sliver of glass was missing. Not broken, not shattered, but scraped, as if something had carved it out delicately, patiently along the seam where the pane met the frame. I checked the other windows. Same thing. Tiny pieces missing. From the corners. Always the corners. We didn't sleep that night. We sat with the lights on, backs to the wall, staring at those windows. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. Tyler packed his bag before I said a word. We didn't speak much as we locked the place down, but just before we left I checked one last time. There, on the window by the old bunk room, a new mark. Another tiny curve shaved off the bottom corner, almost like a fingernail had traced. Along the edge overnight, still no footprints outside, no broken locks, no animals. Just wet dirt and the slow drip of rain through the pines. Tyler sold the cabin the following spring. Cheap. Didn't even go back to clear the rest of the gear. We don't talk about it anymore. But I still think about those windows. About how, whatever it was, didn't try to break in, didn't rush or force. It scraped, a little at a time. Patient. Quiet. As if it was waiting for the day when the glass would finally give. I wasn't planning on hiking that far. It was supposed to be a short solo loop near Cherokee National Forest. 2 days, maybe 3. Just me, a new trail map, and a need to feel like I was doing something with my life. But I took a wrong turn somewhere after Ridge 9. The marker was barely hanging on and I followed a deer trail instead of the official route. By the time I realized my mistake, I was hours off course and racing the sun through wet leaves and low fog. The land down there felt different, heavier. The trail thinned into mossy rock and brush so thick it swallowed the sound of my boots. I kept thinking I'd circle back, but the ridges looked unfamiliar, and by the time the light started to drop behind the trees, I knew I was deeper in than I meant to be. That's when I saw it, tucked into a low basin maybe 50 yards off the slope. A makeshift camp. Blue tarp strung between 2 bent trees. a pile of rusted food cans, clothes draped over a cord like someone had done laundry but never returned. It didn't look fresh, but it wasn't old either. The air smelled like smoke and mildew, damp fabric, wet ash. I called out. Nothing. Walked in slow. The tarp sagged, edges frayed. The fire pit was cold but recent, blackened logs, aluminum foil with what looked like half-burnt rabbit bones inside. There was a folding knife on a stump, open, dull and dark with use. A single boot lay beside the fire ring. I thought it was empty until I looked closer and saw the edge of bone, white, curled, dry. The heel of a foot still tucked inside the leather. That's when the wind shifted and I realized how quiet it was. No birds, no bugs, no other trails. I wasn't looking at a campsite. I was looking at someone's home, and I wasn't alone. I backed away from the fire pit. My pulse was hammering so hard I couldn't hear. I didn't know what I expected, maybe some forest ranger or a hunter coming back from a long walk. But this didn't feel like that. This camp didn't belong to someone who wanted to be found. I moved uphill as quietly as I could, cutting, through thickets and fallen limbs, trying not to breathe too loud. The fog had thickened since sundown, pockets of white hanging between the trees like smoke. Halfway up the slope, I ducked behind a boulder and looked back. Something had changed. The tarp was swaying. There was no wind. I stayed behind that boulder for what felt like an hour, heart thudding, every part of me screaming to run but too afraid to make noise. When I finally moved, I stayed low, slipping deeper into the woods. I didn't have a compass, stupid mistake, but I knew if I could reach the ridgeline, I'd eventually cross the main trail. As I hiked, I started noticing things, small things. Strips of cloth tied around trees, some old sun-bleached, others newer. A bit of deer hide nailed to a stump, a rusty can hanging from a branch, stuffed with something I didn't want to look at too long. These weren't trail markers. They were signs, territorial, purposeful, and I'd walked straight into the middle of it. I picked up my pace. Every snap of a twig behind me made my chest tighten. At one point, I thought I heard breathing. Not close, but not far either. Low, slow, controlled. I didn't stop again until I reached a bluff, a drop-off sharp enough to break ankles if you weren't paying attention. And there, buried in the leaves, was another boot. Not the same one as before. This one was newer, still laced. Inside was a sock. Inside the sock was a toe. I sat down hard. Every part of me felt wrong. That's when I saw the thread, bright red, tied tight around a nearby sapling, leading off into the woods like a fuse. It disappeared into a tunnel of black trees. Someone had walked that path recently. Someone who knew exactly where it went. I didn't follow it. I climbed the ridge using roots and rocks until I reached a narrow game trail that looked familiar. I ran until I saw the marker for Ridge 9 again, broken but still hanging on. I didn't stop. Not until I reached my car 2 valleys over the next afternoon. My hands shook the whole drive home. That was 6 months ago. I never reported it. I don't know why. Maybe I should have. But I still think about that camp. The bones. The way everything was arranged, like someone had been waiting, or watching. I don't hike anymore, not alone, because that camp wasn't abandoned. It never was. And somewhere out there, under that tarp, I think someone is still home. A couple of summers ago, I took a solo backpacking trip into the southern Appalachians, somewhere between the Georgia border and western North Carolina. I was going through some stuff at the time. Messy breakup, burnt out from work, and I just needed space. Somewhere quiet, with no signal, no emails, no reminders. So I planned a 5-day route using sections of the Bartram Trail, mixed with some old fire roads that used to serve logging crews back in the day. Most folks don't use those anymore. They're barely visible on satellite maps, but I liked that. I wanted solitude. I packed light but careful. Tent, filter, bear spray, GPS, extra layers. The first 2 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Cool breeze, thick shade, pine needles underfoot. The trail wound along ridgelines and dropped into green hollows filled with moss and whitewater, creeks. At night, I heard nothing but tree frogs and wind. On the third day, I was supposed to hit a fork that would take me back toward civilization, a switchback trail near an old fire tower. I'd marked it on my map and everything, but when I reached the spot, the trail was blocked by a massive blowdown, a huge tangle of fallen trees and brush that looked like it had been there for years. My GPS showed a faint cutoff route not far away, something unofficial, but it seemed to loop around and reconnect with the same trail on the other side. I figured, what the hell? I had daylight left, water, and decent weather. I followed the cutoff. At first it was fine, a bit overgrown, but walkable. Then it narrowed. The ferns started closing in, spiderwebs stretched across the path. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen a blaze in over an hour. I should have turned back. Instead, I pushed on, trying to bushwhack my way toward where the fire road was supposed to reconnect. But the trees got tighter, the ground got muddy, and the slope turned sharp fast. I was sliding downhill more than hiking. I lost my footing once and fell hard onto my side, tearing a hole in my sleeve and landing in a patch of brambles. By the time I realized I was off trail completely, it was too late to climb back up. I hiked downward, thinking eventually I'd hit a creek or forest road. That's when I came across what looked like an old survival camp tucked into the side of a shallow hollow. It stopped me in my tracks. There was a tarp strung between two trees, sagging with age and damp leaves. Rusted food cans were scattered. Nearby, all opened cleanly, like someone had used a multi-tool. A melted plastic container, torn hiking boots, a foam sleeping pad, half melted by rain and sun. It didn't feel ancient, though. It didn't feel like some 1980s hermit's camp. The logs in the fire pit still had ash clinging to them. There was even a rolled-up jacket sitting beside a pile of split wood. Weathered, yeah, but not destroyed. It looked like someone had been living out there for months. I called out once. Nothing. Not even an echo. At first, I thought maybe someone had gotten lost, just like I had, and tried making the best of it. I took a few steps in, careful not to touch anything. The camp had this weight to it, like it didn't want me there. That's when I noticed the bones, scattered just beyond the tarp, half buried in leaves. At first I thought they were animal bones. White, clean, stripped down. A couple had chew marks on them, maybe raccoon or coyote, but then I saw the shoe. It was on its side, near the base of a tree, torn at the heel. A hiking boot, maybe size 10 or 11, and inside, just visible through the opening, was what was left of a foot, dry, grayed out, like it had been there a while but not long enough to be completely gone. I backed up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Then I heard something else, a branch snapping, not close, but not far either, somewhere up the slope behind the ridge. I turned around, unscanning the trees. Nothing moved, no birds, no wind, just this thick, awful silence pressing in around me. That's when I realized the camp wasn't abandoned, and I wasn't alone out here. I didn't run right away. I should have, but something froze me in place. The kind of fear where you don't want to breathe too loud, like even the trees are listening. That snapped branch behind me kept replaying in my head. The more I stood there, the more I felt like I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied. I backed away from the camp slowly, step by step, not taking my eyes off the trees. I couldn't see anyone, but that somehow made it worse. If it had been a bear or a person with a rifle, at least I'd know what I was dealing with. But this was like being surrounded by a presence you couldn't name. Once I was far, enough up the hill to lose sight of the camp, I turned and started moving fast. Not a sprint. That would have been dangerous with the terrain, but quick enough to make it obvious I didn't want to be there anymore. I kept checking behind. Me nothing, but I could feel something changing in the air. The forest had shifted. The sound, the temperature. The kind of shift you don't notice right away until you realize you haven't heard a bird in 20 minutes. Not a squirrel. not even a bug. Eventually, I found what looked like another trail, or maybe it had once been a trail. Hard-packed, earth, barely visible under the moss and pine needles. It curved along the side of the ridge and looked like it might angle back up toward where I'd come from. I followed it. After maybe a quarter mile, I found a tree, a single tall white oak. Someone had carved into it. Long, shallow slashes, not words, not symbols, just marks. Over and over. Like someone had stood there for hours, dragging a knife across the bark without ever deciding what to say. The cuts were gray and weathered, but still sharp, and hanging from one of the branches, nailed in with a rusted roofing nail, was a piece of fabric. It was from a rain jacket. Bright yellow, the exact same make and color as the one I'd packed. Mine was still in my bag. I didn't stop after that. I just moved. Upward, blindly, hands gripping trees and roots. My legs burned, lungs tight from the panic. But I couldn't stop. I don't know how long I climbed before I spotted a fire road in the distance. Overgrown, but real. I practically fell onto it. Once I hit gravel, I kept going until I found a marker. 221B, one of the old ranger posts, way out near the forest boundary. From there, it was hours before I reached anyone. A state biologist and his assistant were conducting some sort of wildlife survey out near a forestry road. They gave me water, called it in, said I looked pale. I told them I'd gotten turned around. Didn't mention the camp, not the bones, not the foot, not the tree or the jacket. They gave me a ride back to my car. That night I drove all the way to a cheap motel outside Asheville and locked the door twice. I've thought about that camp almost every day since. I've tried to tell myself maybe it was some hiker who passed away out there. Maybe the trail crews just hadn't found him yet. But if that were true, who was still breaking sticks behind me? Who hung that piece of my jacket on the tree? And what scares me most, what wakes me up some nights, is knowing that camp didn't look like it had been abandoned in panic. It looked lived in, built slow, organized, maintained, like someone out there had stayed for a long time. And maybe they're still there, waiting for the next person to take the wrong trail off. Ridge 9. Back in 2021, I took a road trip to clear my head. I'd just left my job in Louisville. Wasn't fired, but it wasn't far off. And my girlfriend and I had split up 2 weeks before that. I didn't have a plan. Just loaded up my old Tacoma, brought a tent and a cooler, and pointed south toward Tennessee. I'd always wanted to explore more of the Appalachians. Not the touristy stuff like Gatlinburg. I mean the real backwoods. The places with names you don't see on maps anymore. I figured a few days camping in the national forest might help shake off whatever was hanging over me. By the second day, I was deep in Monroe County, just past a little town called Tellico Plains. The road twisted through the trees like it was trying to get away from something. Potholes everywhere, no guardrails, no traffic. The kind of road where you see a mailbox every 3 miles and think, who the hell still lives out here? That's when I saw the gravel turnoff. It wasn't marked, just a rutted path peeling off the blacktop, half swallowed by brush. A faded sign hung crooked from a post, letters worn to nothing. I figured it was an old Forest Service road, maybe a shortcut to Bald River. I took it. The first half mile wasn't bad, rough but passable. Then the trees started leaning in. The path got narrower, soft and wet like it hadn't seen a truck in years. I was just about to turn back when the road opened into a small clearing with a weathered old camper sitting dead center. It was one of those aluminum ones on maybe 70s era, with flat tires and a busted rear window covered by a trash bag and duct tape. But here's the thing that stopped me. There were tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones, leading in, but not back out. I parked about 20 feet away and got out. The air was dead still, no birds, just the crunch of gravel under my boots. The camper door was closed but looked like it had been opened recently. The trash around the site wasn't old. Fast food wrappers, a broken styrofoam cooler, beer cans. There was even a folding lawn, chair still sitting upright like someone had just stepped away. I called out, "Hey, anyone here?" Nothing. I walked around the camper. That's when I noticed the side door, not the main one, but a smaller utility panel near the back, was hanging open slightly. I bent down, aimed my flashlight inside. There was a smell. Not rotten, not like decay, more like mildew, sweat, and plastic. Like a sleeping bag that's been packed up too long. Inside, it was cluttered but lived in. Tarp rolled in the corner, knife stuck into a block of wood, peanut butter jar with a spoon still inside. Someone had been staying here. I stepped back, scanning the woods. The tree line was thick, steep on all sides. It hit me that this place wasn't visible from the road. Whoever came here wanted to be away. Hidden. I was about to head back to the truck when I saw something under the camper, a pair of boots, just toes sticking out, like someone lying flat beneath the trailer. I froze. Called out again. "You okay?" Under there, no movement, no response. I edged closer, heart hammering. I crouched down, trying to see more without getting too close. The boots were empty, not tossed or abandoned, just set there, lined up perfectly side by side, laces tied, soles facing the trees. Inside each boot was a single rolled sock. Both socks were soaked red, not fresh, but not old either. I stood there, stomach turning, trying to figure out what I was seeing, when I heard something snap in the trees behind me. A twig. Not a big crack, not storm debris. The kind of sound a person makes when they shift their weight in dry underbrush. I turned fast. Nothing. Just trees. But I swear for half a second I saw something pale slip behind one of the trunks, like a face. Watching. I didn't wait to get a better look. I backed up to the truck, keeping my eyes on the tree line. My hand was shaking so bad I dropped the keys the first time, picked them up fast, shoved them into the ignition and threw it in reverse. I didn't care if I tore up my bumper. I just wanted out. The gravel path felt tighter on the way back, like the trees had shifted closer when I wasn't looking. I hit every dip and rut, bouncing so hard my cooler flipped in the back seat. About halfway down, I glanced in the rear view. The clearing was still visible. The camper, and beside it, standing just at the edge of the trees, was a figure, thin, upright, still. I couldn't make out the face, but I knew it had been watching. Not running, not hiding, just waiting. I made it back to the highway and didn't stop until I hit a gas station about 30 miles out. It was one of those places with bad coffee and scratch-off tickets stapled to the wall. I must have looked rough because the woman behind the counter asked if I was okay. I nodded, said I'd just gotten turned around. That night I got a cheap motel in Murphy and locked every deadbolt I could find. A week later I told a friend about it. The camper, the boots, the socks. He asked me where exactly I'd been, and when I tried to retrace it on Google Maps, I couldn't find the turnoff. I remembered the stretch of highway. I drove it again 2 weeks later, middle of the day. No gravel road, no clearing, just endless trees and shoulderless curves like the forest had swallowed it back up. I don't know what I stumbled onto that day. A hunting spot? A squatter camp? Something worse? All I know is someone had been living in that camper. Someone had left those boots like a message, and someone was still out there, not hiding, watching.